Thanks, Martin, and thank you for having us. Your words are far too kind. Far too kind. So I'm Andrea. That's Jack, obviously. So a little bit of background in addition to what Martin said. So this is us. This is Small Multiples. The two of us as founders, and then we've got two developers and an interaction designer who James and Emma are both design computing honours graduates as well. So we love design computing, and we're really happy that Martin, since he's been here, has been an advocate for design computing all across Sydney, and he's created so many opportunities for everyone, not just us in being able to talk here and many other opportunities, but for all design computing graduates. So in terms of how visualization and cities are related, I guess the very basic form of a city can be seen in maps, because a city is nothing if not a place. So you have maps from a very long time ago. We have maps that are ubiquitous in our everyday life now. You have maps that represent things. This is magnetic intensity of the geological structures underneath Sydney. Maps of things that are above Sydney. Maps that are created from invisible data. So this is photos that people have taken around Sydney. The red ones are the ones from tourists, and the blue ones are ones from the residents of the city. So you can see that the tourists tend to go to the spots that you would expect, and the suburbs are the ones that the Sydney-siders go to, obviously. And more, because so going from the old maps, which had to be hand-drawn, you had to have technical skill in order to create them, going on to Google Maps, which is ubiquitous, and then now to more and more handcrafted but still accessible maps, like this group called Stamen does. We've also, of course, had our hand at creating things from maps for Sydney. This is a visualisation of, there was a game done by a group called Sneepo, who were very lovely and we work with. They had a game where the Carl and Jackie O show on the radio, you could download an app and you could chase an invisible car around Sydney just using your mobile phone. So the idea, of course, in the commercial was that you would run down Martin Place, but eventually people got in their cars and were using the app, and so there were a few incidents and so forth, but eventually the person who had the virtual car last on their app they won a car and $10,000 in the boot. But what happened is that Sneepo had the foresight, of course, to collect all of the data that was happening across the 2-week period, with thousands of people playing the game, hundreds of people active at any given time, and they asked us to visualise what they had done. This is a project that we did just out of curiosity.
Well, it was during our Christmas break, was inspired by Sydney Morning Herald article that the Star City Casino was targeting migrant communities. So it raised my curiosity that, whether that's true or not, whether I can use the power of data to validate that observation. So I went out and went to the casino website, downloaded the bus timetables, geocoded the bus stops, and overlaid the bus routes over demographic information, demographic data. So the darker the area is, the more a certain group of people lives, the higher percentage of that group. So here we have the comparison of, on the left-hand side, we have the population that speaks English only, indication that that they're not migrant communities. On the right-hand side, there are not people the map represents people, areas that have people that speak English, languages other than English. Again, indication of higher percentage of migrant population. And once you overlay the bus routes over these suburbs, the Sydney suburbs, on those two maps, it becomes quite clear that the casino was intentionally sending buses to suburbs that are higher in migrant, specifically Asian communities.
So if the maps are one layer, then data about the people in a city and what they do is probably the second most important layer, and that's where censuses come in, or censi. These are a couple of images from a Croatian almanac from, I think, 1901 or 1902, which visualizes a census that they did on the population. And interestingly enough, because it wasn't the world of PowerPoints and pie charts and Excel, they needed something that was quite representational in order to communicate the results of the census to the everyday person. And so, for example, it's not too clear, but this one shows different people and what sort of food they eat. So in this case, it's a stylized person from China with a very, very big teapot in the background. So that's really easy to understand. So that versus something like a bar chart for that time and place was what was the mode. And I guess these days, we see something more like this. So you have a map and you have abstract points that are in the map, and this one is about Asians in New York City that the New York Times did. Sorry, we're Asian, so there's a theme of Asianness in our slides. So you can see all of the clusters of different communities within New York, where they are, and it sort of it paints a picture of these communities. But close to home, with the Australian census data, this is something that we've done for SBS,
and it's still not unpublished. But here we have two sets of maps. We look at them by row. The first row maps the Mandarin-speaking population in one of the election districts. Electorates. As you can see, it's in the west. Sydney's in the west, and the darker areas shows the Ashfield area. So, if you live in Sydney, you will know there's a high percentage of population that are from Chinese background. The second row shows the Italian population of the same electorate, but the darker area. They concentrated in a different area in that electorate, near Five Dock. And on the third column, we're comparing their English-speaking skills. It's quite obvious for the Mandarin-speaking population that they're still adapting to the new countries, to the new environment. They're in the process of acquiring English skill. But for the Italians, because they're a more established community, they tend to blend in. You can't really tell that isolate the Italian community from the rest of the other ethnic groups. And finally, the last column shows the concentration of these people in terms of year of arrival, the year they migrated to Australia. For the Mandarin-speaking group, they migrated between 2001 and 2010. But for the Italian, you can tell, there's a peak in between 1961 and 1970. And we can further investigate that using this tool we built for SBS. It's called the SBS Census Explorer. Basically, you can select languages, comparing two languages or two places. Here, continuing on from the last slide, we are comparing Mandarin-speaking population in Australia with the Italian-speaking population in Australia. On the left, we are looking at gender and personal income. And the observation is that because the Italians migrated to Australia decades ago, they
The community is more established.
More established, and the curve sort of follows the national-wide average. But for the newer migrant community population, there's a peak on the left-hand side, which is for new income. So we assume there are a lot of Mandarin-speaking students who don't earn an income. So we can sort of see the difference in the shape of the curves between the two groups. Again, the year of arrival here paints a really clear picture that there's a peak in Mandarin-speaking migrants after the 2000s, and the post-war 1950, 1960 peak of the Italian migrants on the right-hand side.
So these are probably just the really basic, the basic output of data from a city about its people and plotting it on a map. But what are the other inputs? There are lots of inputs. And everything from official government census statistics all the way down to your social media and tweets that are geolocated and everything in between. So everything is an input here. If you've seen everything is a remix, then everything is an input here. Also, there are different levels of where you can get the data. So everything from the state, which is cut off, the city electorate, all the way down to your block and the individual. So right now there's probably, or as history has progressed, most of the data is usually in the on this side. So lots of summaries, censuses, big surveys and so forth. But more and more we're actually learning more about the individual.
Yeah, but the trend is that the data collection is becoming very ubiquitous. That it's just everywhere. Examples such as the commercial products. Some of you may have heard of Fitbit. It's a personal activity tracker.
It's one of these?
It tracks your movements, how much you do, how much exercise, physical activity you do during the day, how well you sleep during the night, and how your change in body weight and fat to weight ratio. And the sensors take these measurements and send to this server in the cloud, and you get a personal dashboard of all your historical records. The idea for that product is that people can use this use Fitbit to change their behavior and hopefully towards a healthier lifestyle.
So the idea is that you get a positive feedback loop, although I haven't been getting a positive feedback loop, but the idea is that the aim is you go to 10,000 steps every day, for example, or you want to lose half a kilo every 2 weeks or something like that. And because you're tracking it and you're made aware of how well you're doing, then the positive feedback of you doing well and doing it better and keeping it ongoing. So it gives you awareness of your own behavior.
Another commercial product it's quite new, is called Cube Census. It measures environmental factors such as pollutants in the air, temperature, moisture,
Noise level.
Yeah, it's just two examples that things are coming out, that things you can buy easily, quite cheaply. You can put on your body, place in your room, and they constantly take constant measurements and record them in a data center. And the current trend is going even further, that sensors such as the ones we just showed you in the last slide are becoming even cheaper. People are pitching on Kickstarter many versions of products that they want to build that can measure environmental factors, that can take measurements from the wearer's body. But can this trend lead us to any problems? So this book I'm reading by Zhao Lanier, he's an internet web pioneer. He in this book called Who Owns the Future, he suggested there's a there can be a problem that, big corporations such as Google and Facebook who are constantly collecting their users' data without appropriate compensation. And does this, he's suggesting, does this lead us towards a very dystopic future when everything's automated, there's no need for for manual labor to do the middle class jobs, and people who owns this service, makes a lot of money, but everyone else become extremely poor. Are we going towards the direction of of the early form of capitalism which is even worse, even more polarized, that these people on the top earn super servers and everyone else at the bottom contributing data, contributing to their profit?
So for example, if the company who made this now has maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people's data and their behavior, how many steps they walk each day, what their weight gain, and all of these things, if they could aggregate them and sell it to a health company or a pharmaceutical company, what does that mean for us? So we think there are a couple of solutions. We might be biased in these solutions, but I think that the first one is open data. So when the earthquake hit Japan a couple of years back, the government was extremely slow, apparently, allegedly, in giving information about radiation levels in the Fukushima district. So what people did was they self-organized, so volunteers had these sensors that were able to record radiation levels, and they all collected it together. And so all of this information, even though at an individual level, it might not be accurate, but at an aggregate level it is, and so people were using this service rather than the government service.
Another initiative is called OpenStreetMaps. It's inspired by the idea of Wikipedia, that people can just become volunteers and contribute to the mapping of the cities, using whatever available tool to them. It has grown to a very considerable size, a very large number of contributors, and the quality is comparable to commercial products.
So the idea is that your UBD or your street directory used to actually be proprietary information, and now we're actually opening up, or if you want to take the Google Maps data, that's owned by Google, but OpenStreetMaps actually hands the data back to all of the people who use it and own it. So there are some practices currently in Australia, data.gov.au, which follows the model that data.gov in America and data.co.uk in the UK have done, trying to open up as much of the public sector data as possible that they can. Of course, there are issues with this. For example, I think there's one item in the list which is something like surf conditions. Unfortunately, that data set is actually not really a data set. It's one web page that gets updated every day, and there are numbers, but it's not really a data set. So there are still issues with data transparency, what people understand to be accessible data as well. For example, I don't know if you guys use TripView on your mobile phone, but TripView is amazing. It's probably the best app on your phone. That would have not come out if this guy called Nick Ma, who made it, he scraped the City Rail timetable data. So essentially he loaded every single page using something that he coded up, got all of the timetable data, put it into an accessible format so that he could make an app and make it easier for all of us and all of the citizens of Sydney and its visitors to find timetable information. The City Rail allegedly wanted to shut him down completely after he had done that because he had taken the proprietary timetable information out. But apparently one of the heads said, no, I love TripView. I use it all the time on my phone. And so what they actually ended up doing was license the data to Nick so that he was able to continue using TripView. And now TripView's gone into a state where you can see that your train is late or your bus is late. You can see where your train is. And that was in the course of maybe 3 years or 4 years, to have that shift from locking up all of the data and not letting anyone use it to having these accessible things that you can have on your phone, whatever device it happens to be. And more, there are still problems with like the bus, so in terms of real-time data, but it's all there. Some people say that, say for instance, bus drivers don't want people to know that they're running late and don't want to be held accountable for that. So there are issues about data transparency that still need to be addressed, but on the whole, it's good for everyone. So it's not just the public sector, but the private sector as well. So the New York Times, who does a lot of amazing visualizations, as we've shown you, has opened up all of their article data as well. So you can go into this, and why should they do this? They certainly don't have to, but the idea is that if they've done all of this work to create articles, to amass a resource base, they should open it up to people so that it can be used further, so other people can do cool stuff with it. And that's, I think, the idea that if you have data, release it, because someone's going to use it and someone's going to do something cool with it. Sure, there'll be, if you're a private organisation, there might be competitors who might look at it, or there might be sneaky people who might go, hey, you reported this figure, but maybe it shouldn't be that. And there'll be some people that will call you out, but then there'll be others who will make truly amazing insights and amazing applications for either your consumers to use or the citizens of a city to use. Another example is Kaggle, which brings together people who have really, really big data sets. So big data is a little bit of a buzz term, but these people who have very large stores of data, bringing them together with data scientists and data visualization people to try and, say, for instance, model or computation. Say for instance, there was one with a data set of grants that a university had submitted. They knew what the grants were submitted and they knew which ones were successful. And so the university decided to put this on Kaggle and maybe pay $10,000 to a data scientist who could figure out and model a way for them to see which ones had the best potential and how they could model their grants better so that they could be more successful based on the data. Another great thing that's happening in Australia is Open Australia.
Yes. So as citizens of a country, sometimes most of us wonder, who, on the local, state and federal level, who am I voting for? What's this politician's agenda? Does it align with my own? Most of the time we have no idea. We get our information from TV, online media, but a lot of the information are sensationalist. They don't communicate the facts. This organisation called Open Australia, a group of volunteers coders. They build online tools to open up government data, such as parliamentary debates, how the members of parliament voted, which way they voted, and also tools for recording election advertising material, like the election leaflet website, and build platforms for people to make it easier for people to make freedom of information requests. So as a citizen, if I want to find out something or get my hands on a piece of data that the government owns, it's not a very easy process. The government sits on a lot of data that's in silos, locked up. You have to jump through a lot of red tape, cut through a lot of red tape to retrieve those data from the silos. So there's a website called Your Right to Know. You just basically, it helps you fill out the form tells you who to write to, make the request to, and you can make as many freedom of information requests as possible. Another tool is called Scraper Wiki. It's a platform to connect people who needs data and people who have the skills to retrieve, to extract those data. And they make some of the results open to the public.
For example, the budget's sort of on our minds at the moment, being visualisation people. And you would think that the budget information would be available in an accessible form, but it's actually locked up in the PDFs, and it's always been locked up in the PDFs and images and so forth. So Rosie Williams, she's released budgetos.net.au, I believe, and they've put all of the budget data up there, and they've done it as volunteers. And that means that, say, for instance, news outlets at a very basic level can use it. People who are interested in what the government's spending, they can use it. As citizens, we can go in and drill down through the data and look at it in ways that the budget doesn't give us in its PDF.
It's a very empowering approach. It's giving power to ordinary citizens to have the ability to scrutinize large organizations like governments and big companies.
So the other thing we think is a solution is data visualization. Obviously, you've got all this lovely data, but if you don't understand what's happening, the trends and insights that are inside it, what it's trying to tell you, then what's the use of it? So it's great that you have it, then you need to do something with it. We think that data visualization can save the world, and we'll give you a few examples. So the first one is something that Jon Snow did, not this Jon Snow, but this Jon Snow. He loves Game of Thrones, so he wanted to put a reference in. So what happened was that in the 1850s, there were lots of cholera deaths in London, Soho, and no one knew what was happening and why it was happening so rapidly. And this guy called Jon Snow thought of the idea of plotting all of the deaths onto a map. Seems like a crazy idea. And he found out that actually the cluster of the most deaths was around the Broad Street pump. And it turns out that that was actually the main centre cause for all of the deaths. So the power of maps and visualisation and having the data of all of the deaths here meant that it shut down the pump, and that a lot of people survived that wouldn't have otherwise. Another example is during the Haiti earthquake. So this OpenStreetMaps again. There was no data about roads in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince. No one knew what was happening, how to get supplies in, and what happened was that the OpenStreetMap community and people on the ground went in and put the roads on the map. And this meant that people who needed to get resources in, the Red Cross, everyone could now have an actual map that they knew what they were doing with. And so that's another example of how data and then mapping as a visualization tool can help. So we've got things like, this is SimCity, the new SimCity, which you can apparently only play when you're online, which is a big complaint from people. But imagine if we had all of this data. Imagine if Clover Moore was sitting there with something like this for the city of Sydney. She could see where all the water reservoirs was. Maybe there was a resident who complained about something. She would see a little person bouncing up and down with a complaint. Maybe one of the buildings had a busted energy, I don't know, there was a mechanical failure in that someone could go in straight away and fix that or look at it. You could see perhaps that a concert was going on. You could see all the transport. Imagine if this was actually a tool that real people in real life could use. That would be very amazing. And we put this in because we think it's all your visualization needs in one package for a city, ultimately. Do you have anything to add?
This is a very literal translation of literal mapping, like one building represents one building, but visualization is more about reducing complexity to simpler easier to understand visualizations that are, just an example of how the other industries, like the gaming industry, has adopted this kind of this visual approach, giving statuses,
transparency and overview, and statuses.
And you can turn on and off layers to reveal different information at a glance.
This is about movement within cities, so these are just a few examples by data visualization guru Moritz Stephaner. He entered this into a competition where there was a data set about 4,000 people who moved in and out of New York. So this one shows why they moved, where they moved to. A lot of the time people just migrated within New York, but what happens if they go out to the US and then out to the world? Another one that Moritz did was about the OECD Better Life Index, and so all of the OECD countries, if you view countries as a macro of cities, how countries compare to each other in terms of their well-being. This is something done by the National Film Board in Canada called GDP, which essentially maps how people were doing and stories of people as they were affected by the global financial crisis. So it's not just about the hard data, but also about the soft data and the people who live in your city. This artist, it's called the high water line, so she visualized and went through, I think it was New York, maybe Chicago, and she drew a line of what would happen if we continued ignoring climate change and the sea levels rose up, where they would actually end up in the streets. And so in terms of sustainability, environmentalism, making the so-called invisible of the sea levels visible to people and seeing that impact is something that we can do. It's not just about now, but also about previously. So we used to work for ABC at a project called ABC Open. And this is one of their projects, which is called Now and Then, taking a photo that you've had in your little shoebox and actually taking a picture of it as it is now. And so the idea that cities need to reflect on the past as much as understanding the current and the future. And of course we have to put this one in for good measure. I'm not sure if you've seen it. But essentially this is the Sydney according to all of the different parts of Sydney. Almost all of the different parts. Jack and I are in this funky orange bit, which people tend to ignore. But say for instance, everyone except for people in the Shire think that people in the Shire are bogans. People think that the people in the Shire think that all the people who live around this area are socialists, and so forth. So it's also about people and the stories that they tell about one another and the feelings and the emotions. Back to something a little bit more concrete. Investor is a property management group who we do work with. They have a portfolio of something like 50 office buildings, mainly concentrated in Sydney and Australia, but also some around the world. And they have sustainability data for all of their buildings at 15-minute intervals, which is pretty amazing. So what we did for them is a visualization that takes data from the previous day, because they don't have real-time data, they just have a one-day delay, which compares the energy usage today with, say, for instance, a similar day in terms of weather. And you can see, so ultimately the visualization is given to all of the building managers, so they get a little email every morning to see what happened yesterday, and maybe they, say for instance, put in a new air conditioning unit, or they fix the mechanical failure that was happening. They can see the effect the day after and then change. And again, it's about having a positive feedback loop and sometimes a negative feedback loop to get things done. And so this group now who do this, called Buildings Live, who spoke a couple of weeks ago, they're trying to get these commercial buildings to run more efficiently. So how do we visualize data?
a quote from a recent article by Ian Torp. That he proposed that this is not the right approach. So when you go to someone and say, please make me a data visualization. This is the same as saying, please make me a sandwich. How he sees it is, data visualization is not a end product that you make. It's not something, after you've transformed the data into some visual interactive thing, then that's the end of the story. It's rather a process. So this is a better approach. Say, when you say, please visualize my data, the word visualize entails many other solutions, different solutions, new ideas, and new better questions you can ask. So the better approach is that we want to see data visualization as a process that can aid your decision making, that can improve your existing workflow. And now we can talk about how we, as a practicing data visualization studio, what our workflow is in producing data visualization.
So we actually made this diagram when we were doing the ABC coal seam gas by the numbers microsite. Coal seam gas being a very topical issue. The ABC wanted to follow the lead of, say, the New York Times and the Guardian in producing data journalism projects. So things about an area, in this case it was New South Wales, actually all of Australia, sorry, so that were relevant for the country and its citizens. And so typically in data journalism and in data visualization, surely, you have a data set and you don't know what it's going to tell you. You might want to maybe have some themes and topics around what it's going to tell you, but ultimately you need to let the data sort of speak to you. So sometimes, say for instance, if you're an organization that has a set of data, maybe a simple going into Excel and creating a couple of charts, or giving it to someone who maybe has a little statistical understanding, can have a look at it and maybe they can find insights for you. On the other hand, you might want to tell a really good story to your clients or your customers, and you might be able to find some data that you have in your computer system that might tell that good story. So you can sort of come from both ways. You can come from the data pushing you towards a particular insight and you wanting to say a particular thing, and then finding the data that supports it. Of course, there's a caveat with data that it's not the ultimate truth. I think there's a misconception that a lot of people are using data as a way of defending or justifying, and we all have to take that with a grain of salt, and we certainly do. That data accuracy, nothing's ever going to be the truth. And so when you're doing a visualization or when you find a data set to use, don't always think that it's the ultimate sort of truth. So in conclusion, cities need open data because the citizens in a city need ownership of the data that they create, not just on the basic level of who they are and the data that's being collected about them from official government censuses, but also companies like, say, Foursquare, when you check into your favourite cafe and then you go and check into a bookshop and then you go check into somewhere else, that you should always be the one who owns that data and not your Facebooks or your Googles or your Foursquares. And then once you have that...
Do you want to talk about what's your experience with?
Okay. Yeah. So say, for instance, I have an everyday rewards card with Woolworths, which is fantastic. No, it essentially, the only reason why I got it was because you didn't need to pay for Qantas frequent flyer membership. But long story short, what happens is that every time we go to Woolworths, we swipe the card, and we'll get a couple of points and things like that. But I actually thought it was a really good way of finding out what we were buying every time we went to the grocery shop. So I emailed them later on and say, hey, I use your everyday rewards card. I want my data about what I buy. And they're like, no, we don't do that. You'll have to. So I haven't been bothered to call them, but we know that someone from the Sydney Morning Herald did a similar thing, and was also told that they couldn't access the data because it wasn't in a form that they could readily disseminate.
Yet mysteriously, when you use the Everyday Rewards Card app, it makes product recommendations based on your previous purchases. So they do somehow store your purchase history.
And also, as citizens, not just so it's at an individual level to know more about yourself in the wider scheme of things and your interaction with companies and your interaction with the government and with the city. But also, as a greater whole, if you run a company or you're part of an organisation in your community, that you get higher level data about the aggregate and the group, not just yourself, of course. And then data visualization cities need because they need to visualize the data that they have. And again, it's not an endpoint or a product, it's a process, because through the process of visualizing your data, you're understanding it more. You're also giving it a form that people can understand better as well.
By the end, the client, for example, our client may realize data visualization is not something they need. Through the process of working with them, talking with them, by examining the data, transforming the data into a workable form, they might discover insights, a better way to improve how they work. Therefore, formulate some sort of solutions to solve their problems.
So data visualization may not help save the world all the time, but it can definitely make cities more efficient. It can make people happier by knowing more about what's going on. And it can also arm people with something to keep them more informed about what's going on. That is it.